depart from iniquity. And so we need the Old Testament law reiterated and taught in the New Testament to understand what iniquity is, so that when we are going to name the name of Christ, we know what God wants us to do. Being holy was not the way to heaven. We lost out on that. So we found that the way to God's righteousness was by faith. But by faith in God and in His righteousness brings us to a place where we must live holy. And so in the New Testament, Jesus quotes the commandment, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," proving that He approved and believed in it. But He also expands on it a little bit. And I'm not going to speak a lot on this subject, but I just want to go and read the things that He said. There's 2 times that He makes, let's say, he puts the commandment in God's light and shines His light of holiness on it and shows us beyond just the "thou shalt not" that is contained in Exodus chapter 20 what it means. And so one of those will be in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 27. "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." Now, I am not going to talk about this subject this morning, because the honest truth is the 10th commandment is going to deal with this subject in a much greater detail. And so we will look at that subject more then. But Jesus points out the fact that you could live, grow up, get married, have a wife, grow old, and die, never having ever considered having an adulterous relationship with anybody, and yet have broken the commandment because you were evil inside. You were evil inside. You controlled your outer actions, but inside you were evil, and inside you broke God's law. And so that's all I'm going to say about that right now. Mark chapter 10 and verse 11. "And he saith unto them, Whosoever shall put away his wife and marry another committeth adultery against her. And if a woman shall put away her husband and be married to another, she committeth adultery." Now, I understand this is a controversial subject, and there are some few people on earth who take this to an extreme understanding, and I am not here this morning to preach or teach on this subject, or to straighten any doctrinal misunderstanding about it. But I'm just simply pointing out the fact that Jesus said, if you divorce somebody and go marry another person, it was adultery. Now, I do not believe the doctrine of perpetual adultery, where if somebody is divorced and remarried, that they commit adultery every time they go to bed. I do not believe that. I do not think anywhere in the Scriptures that is taught, and I'm just going to make that statement, though I'm not going to go through all my reasons for believing that. But it is simply like this. I want you to understand, if we were in a different country perhaps, or in a different era of history where polygamy was practiced, if a man was married to a woman and he went and took another wife, we would not call that adultery. We would call that polygamy. Okay? Now, I do not believe that God ever liked polygamy. I understand that some godly people in the Old Testament practiced it. I don't think it was ever God's will, but it wasn't adultery. Whatever else we are going to say about it, it wasn't adultery. So, if a man is married to a woman and he goes and marries another wife, he does not do what God intended. He is going against the way God made things to work, but he did not commit adultery. So why does it become adultery if he divorces first? You would actually think that it would put it further from adultery if he was first divorced. Right? because he's married to this woman. Now he marries another woman. He's having, you could call that an affair if you wanted to. That's what we would call it today. We would just say, well, that's just your dumb excuse. You're just having an affair. You know, you're committing adultery. That's what we would say today. But in times where polygamy were allowed, no, he's not committing adultery. He simply is married to two women now. But if he first divorced the old woman and went and married her, then it's adultery, according to Jesus. Why does it become adultery then? Because it was against his wife. That's why it was adultery. Because he did it against her. In other words, he failed to maintain the pureness of the promise that he made to that woman. He left her for another woman. And so it becomes an affair, an adulterous relationship in God's view. Divorcing to marry another person becomes adultery. The act of divorce and remarriage becomes adultery. Now, that's all I'm going to say, because we could go for the entire morning on that subject, and we could hash all sorts of things around. I do believe the Scripture is clear in the teaching on that if somebody has divorced in the past and is remarried, they are not supposed to divorce to get right with God from that second wife, as some people teach. But we're gonna quit there. All I'm showing you here is that Jesus took the commandment that God gave in Exodus chapter 20. He expanded on it. He told what was really in God's heart and what it means to not commit adultery. All right. Now we are going to move on to some more important things. The awful consequences of adultery. Romans chapter 13. Romans 13 and verse 9. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. All right, so very plainly, we remember that we break the 10 Commandments down into 3, 1, and 6. 3 commandments regarding God, 1 commandment regarding ourselves, that's the Sabbath, and then 6 commandments regarding our fellow man. So those 6 commandments are grouped together here as these are things that you would not do if you loved a person. If you love, you would not do these things. And so the verse is talked about, love worketh no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. The verse that was actually talked about was thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, quoted from the Old Testament. So the reason that adultery is sin is not because God decided one day, hey, I'm going to make earth, I'm going to create these little people, and I'm going to set this little group of laws up that I'm going to say this is going to be right and this is going to be wrong and so on. No. It was nothing arbitrary. It was the simple fact that adultery could not be right because it hurt people. And it will always hurt people. You could not commit adultery without hurting somebody. So, because love is the chief thing on which all the law and the prophets hang, adultery is a sin. Now, I don't know, I have seen AI a lot in its responses on Google when you ask questions, and sometimes AI gets things really messed up. They don't have a clue what is going on, and they cannot answer your question. Sometimes they hit it dead on, and this one, they hit dead on. So let's look at just what does the world think about adultery. So I asked the question to Google, do most people believe it is wrong to commit adultery? Now, This is why I want to know the answer to this question, because I said last time that God had written the law in our hearts. And so that even if we didn't have the law, when we did things that were sin, we felt guilty inside. We felt bad about it because we knew inside that these things were wrong, because God made us that way. Before he ever gave the law to Moses, he created us so that we had that inner conscience that told us the difference between right and wrong. So this is AI's answer to my question. Do most people believe it is wrong to commit adultery? Yes. Most people believe it is wrong to commit adultery, with a majority of Americans and a global majority finding it morally unacceptable. Public opinion consistently shows strong disapproval of marital infidelity, though the reasons for this belief and the level of tolerance can vary by culture and individual. In the United States, a high percentage of Americans consider adultery to be morally wrong. For example, one poll found that 91% of American adults consider it morally wrong, making it one of the most condemned behaviors, even more so than issues like human cloning or suicide. Globally, a global survey found that 78% of people across 40 countries believe that extramarital affairs are morally unacceptable, though there are some exceptions. Contradictory views. Despite the strong moral disapproval, surveys have also found that a majority of people who have been unfaithful say their own actions were justified. Can you imagine AI writing that? Got it right on the head. We all believe it was wrong, unless I did it. I was excused. I had a reason. I didn't sin. Do I ever sin? Isn't that the human race? Well, what a shame. What a shame. We're going to call that basing the rightness or the wrongness or the truth or the falseness of God's law on what I am feeling. All right? The commandments of God do not increase or decrease in truth or importance based on how I feel. So, when a man cheats on his wife, and this poor girl is crying her eyes out, and we are all sympathetic towards us, it creates feelings in us. And we look at that man and we say, he's the devil, he's a scoundrel, he's an evil beast, he's awful. Why could anybody ever treat a woman this way? That's so awful, it's so wrong, and we're so mad and we're so angry, and adultery is morally wrong. And then, 10 years later, when we do it, we say, well, my wife hadn't been good to me anyway. Who knows? She was probably cheating on me too. I am in a different circumstance, and I don't see that there's anything wrong with me doing this. But the law of God, throughout all of our feelings, stood firm without changing, and it never will change. It never can change. It cannot be different based on circumstances or person. It just simply held the standard across all of humanity, across all of the world, and is standing there waiting for the judgment day. And it does not make any difference whatsoever how you feel about something as to whether or not it is or is not right. Now, some of us know that in some physical things, but I would say the bulk of people on earth interpret their religion based to some degree on their feelings. All right? You can't do it. If God said that Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life, that no man comes to the Father except by him, if God said that it's true. And it does not matter if you feel in your heart that God is love. And it does not matter if you feel like you are right with God. It does not matter if God had answered prayers of yours and made you feel like you were one of his sons. It does not matter. It does not make any difference how you feel if God says something. Then what God says stands absolute, and we do not get to change it. And so, when it comes to adultery, we feel like it is wrong when somebody hurts a person until it becomes us and we justify our actions because that's just simply how we do it. That's how we feel. We don't feel bad about things in certain circumstances, but feelings does not create the law of God. Sometimes we don't feel things because we were unable to see its effects before we created the effects of our sin. Sometimes we don't feel things because our heart is as hard as stone and we have grown very cold and wicked towards somebody, like a wife or a husband. There's many reasons that we don't feel, but it does not make any difference why or if we feel. The law of God stands absolute. Okay. So, I give you these words. Have faith in God's commandments. Now, Jesus said have faith in God. But if we have faith in God, we should have faith in God's commandments. Because if God gave us commandments, those commandments were meant for good, not for evil. And so if we have faith in God, we're going to put faith in God's commandments. God's commandments are good. They're protecting, they're helpful, they will take care of us, etc., etc. All right, Proverbs chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5 and verse 20. And why wilt thou, my son, be ravished with a strange woman and embrace the bosom of a stranger? For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he pondereth all his goings. His own iniquities shall take the wicked himself, and he shall be holden with the cords of his sins. He shall die without instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray. So, as the wise man preaches here through the book of Proverbs, he's preaching and he's telling us, he's giving us wisdom, and he says, this is what happens to the man who commits adultery. You could say, oh, I don't believe in God. Okay? Some people say that. I don't believe in God. Now, if I don't believe in God, then I don't believe in the 10 Commandments either, because God supposedly gave these 10 Commandments. And if I don't believe in God, why should I obey the 10 Commandments? I'll tell you why you should obey the 10 Commandments. Because you're going to die without instruction, and in the greatness of your folly, you're going to go astray. Because if you disobey the 10 Commandments, it's going to take you to some very, very, very rough places on earth. Whether there is a God or whether there isn't a God. Of course, there is a God. But you're going to meet God someday in judgment. That's true. But if there were no God and you broke the 10 Commandments, you would still go greatly astray, and you would cause your own self-harm because you did not listen. And so Proverbs also, chapter 6 and verse 24, we read, to keep thee from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. Lust not after her beauty in thine heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. For by means of a whorish woman a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned? So he that goeth in to his neighbor's wife, whosoever toucheth her shall not be innocent. Men do not despise a thief if he steal to satisfy his soul when he is hungry, but if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give all the substance of his house. But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding, and he that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. A wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though thou givest many gifts. I'm not going to go too in depth in this passage, simply to read it and just say, this is what Solomon, the wise man, is telling us. You could say, thou shalt not commit adultery because God said not to. But even if you disregarded God, you should not commit adultery because it will lead you down a path of shame and of trouble and hatred, and every kind of ill follows the man who performs such an awful act. So here's the reason you don't commit adultery, because you do it against your own soul. If you want to be in trouble, then you should do something so ridiculous. Now, it is also true that God's judgment rests on the head of the man who disobeys these words. And God has a couple of different ways that judgment come against sin. The only absolute way, and the only way that where all sin will receive exactly what it has coming to it, will happen at the day of judgment. That is the only time that God sits as the judge, and he says, because you did this, you shall receive this. And at the day of judgment, everything is going to be made right. But in the meanwhile, while earth rolls, there are certain things that God himself brings out as judgments against people who commit sins. Some of those things will come completely naturally as cause and effect. Others of those things will come as God intervenes to try to bring a sinner to his senses. And so he will touch things in your life when you are on the wrong track. He will cause you pain sometimes intentionally to try to wake you up and show you that you are on the wrong path. And so we go to David, and David is going to get a little bit of both of these. When he has sinned and he has committed adultery, David is going to receive a little bit of cause and effect, and he is going to receive a little bit of the judgment of God. And we'll read in 2 Samuel chapter 12, starting in verse 7. And Nathan said unto David, Thou art the man. Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul. And I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would moreover have given unto thee such and such things. Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of this sun. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, and before the sun. And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, The Lord also hath put away thy sin, thou shalt not die. Howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. And Nathan departed unto his house, and the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick. All right. So I said that David was going to receive two things for his sin. One, he was going to receive some effect that he caused by his sin. And two, he was going to receive some judgment from God. Now, both of those things are contained in that last verse we read, as well as some of the verses before. But the two things that were coming to him is, you have caused the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. Because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. So the enemies of God, rather than being attracted to Israel and being attracted to God, and perhaps understanding that the Lord, He was the God, He was the true God, and maybe perhaps being converted, and maybe perhaps even becoming a part of Israel and worshiping the true God, instead of them doing that by the thing that David did, they were instead going to blaspheme. That was just cause and effect. David committed a sin. It was going to take him down a very, very weary road. Life was going to go against him. All sorts of trouble was going to come. And because of that, the people around Israel were going to blaspheme God. And they were going to blaspheme David. And they were going to blaspheme all that was there in Israel. But then Nathan also said to David, the child that was born is also going to die. And there was no cause and effect on that. The child was healthy, undoubtedly. There was no reason it was going to die, but the Lord struck it. Because God said, I want you to know and feel the awfulness of the sin that you did. And in spite of the fact that I have the ability to forgive sin through Jesus Christ, you are still going to understand the damage that you did. I'm going to make you feel it. And so God took the baby away. So, I wonder if David could have had Nathan come to him before he sent to Bathsheba and said, come to my house. And Nathan had been able to stand in front of David and had said to him, David, if you do this thing, here is a list of things that are going to happen to you. What's that list? Well, you're going to work for a year to try to hide your actions because Bathsheba's going to get pregnant, and you're going to have to try to hide the fact that you touched her, and you're going to go insane, stressing for a couple of months, worried, sick about this, trying to get rid of Uriah so that you can be at peace again. You're eventually going to get your hands bloody with the murder of your neighbor when you put him intentionally in a place in the war that the enemies are going to get him and kill him. And your conscience is going to feel so awful, you're going to lay in bed at night bawling in your pillow, unable to sleep because you can't bear yourself because your sin was so grievous. You're not going to be able to sleep. You're not going to be able to rest. David, don't do this thing. And then, if that isn't bad enough, pretty soon your sons are going to turn on you because they disrespect you. And this is what's going to happen. Anytime that anybody commits a sin of this nature, you're going to lose all the respect of everybody who knows you. That is the truth. That always happens. And so your sons are going to turn, and they're going to disrespect you, and they're going to cause you damage, and they're going to say, I'm going to be the king, and they're going to try to take the kingdom from you. And if that's not bad enough to take the kingdom, when you run and you flee for your life and you get out of Jerusalem, they're actually going to gather your nation, the nation of Israel, all the people together, and the whole nation of Israel who has been subject to you and loves you is going to come against you to try to kill you. David, wake up. You know what? You say, why didn't Nathan come to David before he committed this? Well, he didn't actually, but David was warned. He had the Bible, and God had already said it all. If only he had been paying attention to the Word of God, he would have already read everything that he needed to know. God had already warned him. But the consequences in David's life were awful. I want to just tell you a little bit from a personal side on this subject, because I think that it's important that some children that are growing up in this room hear this. The world always comes and tells you, sent by Satan, the world always comes and tells you there are things out there that are really sweet, really good, really fun, really necessary. In fact, life wouldn't even be the same without them. And Satan always comes tempting you to do something that God said no about. Now, every single time that the world comes and tells you this is okay, or this will make you happy, when God said no about it, I would start right off the bat by believing God, because He's the one who knows. Satan is out to destroy. Satan is out to destroy everybody, not just you, but your neighbor too. And if he can get somebody to commit adultery, he destroys two families at the same time. Now, of course, I grew up in a very conservative, very sheltered Christian home. And didn't even have any girlfriends while I was growing up. And I didn't have very much opportunity to commit very many sins when I was a child because I just was at home. There was nothing, there was no trouble for me to get into. And I want to tell you, I could never, ever thank God enough for the way that I grew up. I never, ever, ever could thank God enough, or anybody who was involved in my life, my parents chiefly, for the fact that I was privileged to grow up in a situation like that. Now the fact, I'm going to tell you the truth, the fact that I never committed a sin, neither adultery nor fornication with a girl in my life, was not because I was more holy than other people who have committed sins. It was because God gave me something. God gave me something that was very, very blessed. The ability to learn the truth of the Word of God before I was old enough to sin. Don't ever, ever, for a moment, turn away from that if you had that ability. If God gave you the ability to learn the Word of God when you were young, it will prevent you from doing hundreds of wrong things that the rest of the world is doing every day. So I'm going to tell you the truth. I was not more holy. And the reason that I know for certain that I was not more holy is because I know, based on what Jesus said is adultery, that I, inside my heart, broke all God's commandments. But you know, I've talked to a few people here and there in life, people from the world that don't have God's standards. And you know what the young people always say? When they talk about, for example, and this is not exactly adultery, but it's very similar, when they talk about whether or not they would sleep with their girlfriend or boyfriend before they got married, they always say these things. Most young people have a certain level of attraction to that kind of purity, like it would be a good thing, but they say, I don't know that I could wait. I don't think I could do that. I didn't get married till I was 28 years old. And it just so happened that on a very bad day of my life, I fell head over heels for a girl who was quite a few years younger than me. And so I had to wait a long time to get married. And you know, I'm going to tell you the honest truth. Never one time in those years of seeing and looking at, I have no doubt in the world that this is the absolute truth, in seeing and looking at the hottest woman that heaven ever designed. Never one time in my life did I ever even stop and consider for one moment that I would touch her. Never. It was never an option. Now I want to give you guys an example of something that I think you can understand and follow. Some of us like big cars, some of us like little cars. If you went to the Toyota dealer and you were shopping around and you got to test drive a Sequoia, you'd be like, I need this car. I absolutely have to have this car. This is the sweetest thing I've ever been in. And the fact that the price tag is $100,000 might not really stop you from wanting that car really, really, really bad. Now, maybe if you don't like big vehicles, you might be the kind of person that would have to go to the Ford dealer and drive the Mustang, maybe. And you'd be like, I want this car. And did any of you guys ever, in your wildest imagination, stop and kind of make a game plan, like maybe some night I'll go to the dealership and take one of these vehicles and steal it? Did you ever think maybe you might do that? In every single person's heart, there is a thing, a place that you go that's just simply there's a line, there's a fence. You would never cross that line. Now, I know there are people who do some foolish things on this earth. And it is possible. Now, I think most people in this room have used a certain amount of intelligence, but it would be possible that Ezra and Joanna could save very hard savings to build a house for 10 years. And one night, Ezra could get very tempted to buy a $100,000 vehicle and spend his entire savings on it when Joanna was out at a girl's party. Okay, that is possible that Ezra would do that. Probably, I don't think he would, but it's possible. He would never go steal it. He would never go steal the car. It is possible that some stupid young person might go buy a brand new vehicle on a whim on a credit card. We do really dumb things, but you would not go and steal it. Now, there are people who would. You know what's the difference between a person who would go steal a vehicle and a person who would not? It's simply their own personal line. I will not. I know better than to steal a vehicle. I don't want to spend time in jail. You can't steal a vehicle and stay out of jail. So why would I? Right? Well, adultery or fornication is exactly the same thing. It's a line. Why would you never commit adultery? Why would you never go to bed with a girl that you were not married to ever in your life? Why would you never, ever do that? There's one very simple answer that will never change and will support you in every situation in life. Because God said so. That's the only thing that you need to keep you from sin. If you will accept God and you will believe Him and you will set yourself to obey His word, you don't ever have to fall into that kind of a sin. One simple thing that inside will prevent you. Your own choice. Because God said so. Now, guys, I want to tell you something. I did not, by everything that I just said on this subject, mean to say that I sit in a place of safety where I could not sin. That's not true. I live in a body of flesh. Satan tempts me like he tempts other people on this earth. I know. I have been attracted to girls since I was 5. I can remember the first one who blew me off my feet when I was 5. She had long blonde hair, and I just didn't even know how to look at her. It was just too much for me. But the fact of the matter is, I didn't have to ever sin with a girl. I didn't ever have to. But there's only one way that will prevent a person from never, ever committing that kind of a sin. If you say, I will not, and then you stay humble. If you say, I will not, and get proud, you will. If you say, I will not because I could not, I don't have it in me to do that. I would never do that. You'll probably fall. But if you say, I will not, God helping me, and stay humble and recognize the sin that lives inside of you, then you will probably be safe. And every person that is in this room has the ability to stay safe. There's nobody in this room that ever needs to commit adultery. There's nobody in this room who ever needs to go to bed with a girlfriend before they're married. You don't have to do that. You can 100% stay pure. It is not hard. It's actually not hard at all. You just simply have to make the decision that that's what you're going to do. If you decide, as a married person, that life has brought you too many troubles, that your wife or your husband is not being good to you, that it's too hard to be married, that you aren't satisfied, and you do go and take somebody else's husband or wife, or somebody even who is not married that's still adultery because you're married, the trouble that you will experience from that sin is tremendous. The amount of guilt and pain that you will cause yourself and your wife and other people involved is nothing that could ever even be legitimately described. the emotional distress that your children would suffer from an act like that is beyond imagination. It is perhaps the most stabilizing force that any child in this entire world has in their life, is that mommy and daddy love each other. The most stabilizing force that any child has. And if mommy and daddy are separated, or mommy and daddy are not even getting along, if mommy and daddy are even threatening to separate, your children will go through emotional turmoil. It will absolutely upend their lives. How many young people today, their emotions and their lives are shot as teenagers because their parents can't keep things together. If you are a Christian and you commit adultery, it will be the end of your testimony for the rest of your life, probably. Even if you get right with God, it will be the end of your ability to witness, most likely. You will probably wreck your health because the trauma will be so great. God did not say, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," playing games. He said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," because it ruins people's lives. It is against love. So because God said so is our reason for not committing adultery. That's our first and foremost reason. There's another really, really, really good reason not to commit adultery. Because the judgment of God is severe and eternal. That is a very, very, very good reason not to commit adultery. Now, it is true that sometimes marriages don't work out the way God intended them to work. It's not God's fault. It's human failure when that happens. But sometimes marriages don't work out like they should. And if there is anything that we ought, all of us, to do to try to ensure that nobody ever commits adultery, we should always make sure that our relationship with our husband or our wife is right. And there are some very, very easy things that everybody can do to make their husband or their wife pure. It is true that if a husband is married to the most cranky wife in the world, he cannot commit adultery. Okay, that is true. And the consequences that come in his life if he did commit adultery will be worse than living with the woman who is causing him pain. That is true. But that does not therefore mean that the wife cannot make it easier for him to make the right decision if she quits being an awful case to live with. It is interesting that Solomon in Proverbs addresses women on these things a number of times, and not so much the man. Now, it is not true that women are more likely to be this way than men. In fact, I'll tell you the honest truth. In my experience in life, I have found that in a lot of marriages, not all, but in a lot of marriages, there is going to be one of the two that is going to be difficult. And sometimes it is the guy, and sometimes it is the girl. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's just simply a matter of the fact of which person had the selfish, uncontrolled personality. But so when I read these verses out of Proverbs, we could be talking about a woman, like Proverbs says, or we could be talking about a man, like Proverbs doesn't say, but they apply equally. Proverbs 14 and verse 1 says, "Every wise woman buildeth her house, but the foolish plucketh it down with her own hands." It's a very simple verse. How does a foolish woman pluck down her house with her own hands? Well, you know, in the days that this was written, a lot of houses were built out of stone. No woman pulled those stones off the wall with her hands. Today, our houses are built with 2x4s and all sorts of, heavy wood siding or bricks or you name it, even the drywall inside. I would like to see any of you women get up and even rip a sheet of drywall off of that wall. You couldn't do that. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the fact you're wrecking your marriage. You're wrecking your real home with your hand. By the things that you do, you're wrecking your home. It's pretty simple here. Why don't you control yourself? If you love, if you show love, if you are kind, if you speak kindness, if always everything you do is calculated to build up the person that you are married to, why would he or she ever turn against you? Sometimes they do, because people are very wicked, and sometimes it's true you might be completely right with your husband or wife, and they might turn on you and do you nasty. Those are very sad situations, but they also do happen. Now in Proverbs chapter 21, Solomon says in verse 9, "It is better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house." That's a sad statement. It's a sad thing that there would be a woman who made it so much better for her husband to live in a small corner on the housetop than to have access to the house. In the house, there's a soft bed to sleep on. There's a kitchen with food to eat 3 times a day. There's a refrigerator always there. There's hot showers in the bathroom. There's even a place to use the toilet. And God says, no, brush it all aside. Sometimes it's better to dwell without all those things in one corner of the house than to have the whole house if you have to be there with the woman who lives there. That's pretty shocking. Verse 19, same chapter. "It is better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman." And in chapter 25 and verse 24, he said, "It is better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than with a brawling woman and in a wide house." I think that's just a repeat, honestly, of the one we just read. Proverbs chapter 27 and verse 15. "A continual dropping in a very rainy day and a contentious woman are alike." I don't know why Solomon mentions women in every one of these verses. Let's just say probably because he is a man. And so he's mentioning it from a man's point of view. Because the honest fact of the matter is there are men who are just like this. This is not something that women are prone to and men don't usually do. It is not true. There are men that are so absolutely obnoxious and so difficult and so hard to be around that it is a chore to know them. And there are also women that are just like that. Now, we say, oh, I would never be that kind of a man or that kind of a woman. Well, what if we were just 10%? What if we were just 10% that kind of a woman? And we, of course, you remember, we judge everybody else who does it but excuse ourselves when we do it. That's how we are, right? So everybody else cannot commit adultery, but if I do it, I'm right. So everybody else cannot be a contentious woman, but if I do it, it's because my husband needs to be bossed around. No, if you do it, it's because you're a sinner. Let's just keep things the way God put them. So, adultery is a crime against humanity. It is a crime against God. And above those things yet, it is a crime against your own soul. God says, if you do these things, it's a sin against your own soul. You're hurting your own self if you would ever dare to do such a thing. Why do human beings ever commit such sins? Well, it's a very sad testament. It's a very sad testament to the evil that is built inside our hearts. Without the control of God, without God's laws and God's understanding and God's judgments and our submission to them, we all end up living like fools. But if you've got God's laws and you've got God's help and you make a commitment to God, you don't have to commit these kinds of sins. You can live above this. You don't ever have to fail in these issues. You can live a clean, morally pure life where you are both respected and loved by everybody who knows you because of the choices you made. So that is the seventh commandment. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Let's take a break.